Hassan al-Basri, 642 to 728 CE, was a prominent Islamic scholar, theologian, and ascetic of the early Islamic period. Born in Medina, he was raised in a household of Salama, one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad, which provided him with direct exposure to the teachings and traditions of the Prophet. In his youth, al-Basri moved to Basra, Iraq, where he became a central figure in the religious and social life of the community. He was known for his eloquent sermons and deep piety, emphasizing asceticism and the transient nature of worldly life. His teachings often focus on the importance of self-examination, muzaba, and the certainty of death, urging Muslims to live with mindfulness of the hereafter. Al-Basri was also a critical voice against the political rulers of his time, particularly the Umayyad dynasty. He argued for the concept of free will, asserting that individuals are responsible for their actions, countering the deterministic views held by some of his contemporaries. His theological perspectives laid the groundwork for later Islamic thought. Throughout his life, al-Basri maintained a reputation for humility and integrity, often advising rulers and governors without fear or favor. His legacy endures in Islamic scholarship, with many of his sermons and sayings preserved and studied for their spiritual and ethical insights. Hassan al-Basri, d. 728 CE, is widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in early Islamic history. His teachings, both theological and practical, left a deep mark on the development of Islamic thought. His focus on asceticism, zuhd, and an unwavering commitment to the pursuit of piety and righteousness are the foundations of his reputation. Early life and education. Hassan al-Basri was born in Medina, where he spent his early years in the company of key figures of early Islam. His mother was a servant in the household of Salama, one of the wives of Prophet Muhammad, which allowed him to gain early exposure to the nascent Islamic community's culture and values. His father, a Persian slave, had been freed, adding a layer of complexity to his identity and contributing to his keen sense of humility throughout his life. Although al-Basri was born into a relatively humble family, he quickly gained a reputation for his deep spirituality, intellectual acumen, and ability to grasp the theological and ethical dimensions of Islam. As a young man, he moved to Basra, Iraq, which was a major intellectual center at the time. Asceticism and thought. Al-Basri's ascetic lifestyle and insistence on living a simple life dedicated to God were central to his teachings. He is credited with formulating the concept of muzaba, self-examination, which encourage individuals to hold themselves accountable for their actions, thoughts, and intentions. This practice was an important part of his broader message, which stressed the fleeting nature of this world and the eternal significance of the afterlife. He often warned people against being consumed by material wealth and worldly pleasures, reminding them of the ultimate reality of death and the transient nature of life. His views on this subject became foundational for later Islamic mysticism, Sufism. Political and theological views. Al-Basri was outspoken in his criticism of the political rulers of his time. He strongly opposed the Umayyad dynasty and their lavish, luxurious lifestyles, which he saw as inconsistent with the true spirit of Islam. He maintained that rulers and leaders should be held accountable for their actions and should live in accordance with the ethical standards set by Islam. This stance placed him in opposition to the prevailing power structures, but he remained an influential figure due to his deep credibility and integrity. On theological matters, al-Basri advocated for free will and personal responsibility, arguing that individuals were responsible for their own actions. This was a counterpoint to more fatalistic views held by some of his contemporaries, and his thought on human agency were later influential in the development of Islamic theology, particularly the Mu'tazila and Ash'ariyya schools. Legacy. Throughout his life, al-Basri's reputation as a scholar and ascetic grew, and his sermons drew large crowds. He was sought out by people from all walks of life, including rulers, governors, and common folk, who sought his advice and wisdom. Despite his fame, he remained humble and devoted to his spiritual mission. Many of his sayings, recorded by his disciples and followers, have been preserved and are still studied today. These include reflections on topics such as the dangers of hypocrisy, the importance of sincerity in worship, and the need for self-purification. His works had a profound influence on later Islamic scholars and mystics, and his legacy is honored in both Sunni and Shia traditions. Al-Basri's teachings continue to inspire Muslims worldwide, particularly in the fields of spirituality, Asceticism, and Islamic Ethics. His life serves as a model of piety, humility, and intellectual rigor, and his commitment to truth and integrity remains a guiding light for many in the Muslim world. Sufism. Hassan al-Basri is often seen as a precursor to the development of Sufism. His emphasis on inner purity, detachment from worldly desires, and a deep connection with God laid the foundation for many of the principles that would later shape Sufi practices. His thoughts on the nature of God, the importance of repentance, and the need for constant self-reflection resonated with later Sufi mystics. His influence is particularly evident in the works of famous Sufi figures like Junaid al-Baghdadi and al-Ghazali. Both of these figures, who are central to the development of Sufism, drew inspiration from al-Basri's teachings on spiritual refinement and the necessity of striving for a direct, personal connection with God. For example, al-Basri's focus on sincerity in worship and the rejection of ostentation would later become a core component of Sufi thought. His legacy in Islamic scholarship. Al-Basri's impact on Islamic scholarship extends beyond his teachings on spirituality and ethics. He also made important contributions to Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, and hadith studies, though his primary legacy lies in his ascetic and mystical thought. One of the most important aspects of his work was his contribution to the development of the ilm al-hadith, science of hadith. As a respected scholar, he is known for his expertise in transmitting the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. His connections to the early companions of the Prophet allowed him to have direct access to authentic traditions, and he became a key figure in the preservation of the hadith literature. Al-Basri's teachings on the importance of knowledge and education were also influential. He advocated for the pursuit of knowledge as a means to gain proximity to God, and he often reminded his followers that knowledge should be coupled with action and humility. His intellectual rigor helped shape the early Islamic educational system, which later flourished in institutions like Al-Azhar University and other centers of Islamic learning. Final years and death. Hassan al-Basri continued to teach, counsel, and serve as an example of piety throughout his life. He lived into his later years in Basra, where he had a significant influence on the community. His followers, who admired his deep spirituality and wisdom, continued to spread his teachings after his death. Al-Basri passed away in 728 CE, but his legacy lived on through his writings and the numerous individuals who have been touched by his teachings. Today, his life and work continue to be a source of inspiration for those seeking a deeper connection with their faith, particularly in the realms of mysticism, asceticism, and ethical behavior. Hassan al-Basri stands as one of the most influential figures in the early history of Islam. His teachings, which emphasize spiritual purity, humility, and asceticism, have had a profound impact on both Islamic theology and mysticism. His commitment to an ethical and sincere life, free from the distractions of worldly wealth and power, remains a powerful message for Muslims across the world. His teachings on the importance of self-reflection and personal responsibility continue to shape Islamic thought to this day, and his legacy is celebrated in the spiritual practices of many Muslim communities. Whether through his contributions to Islamic scholarship or his role in the early development of Sufism, Hassan al-Basri's influence on the Islamic world is immeasurable. His life and work offer a model of piety, intellectual integrity, and spiritual devotion for generations of Muslims. Hassan al-Basri's legacy in the context of Islamic ethics and society. Hassan al-Basri's role as a moral and spiritual guide extended far beyond his personal life. His thought had a profound impact on the ethics of early Islamic society, especially with regard to the relationship between individual conduct and social justice. His constant reminder to be mindful of one's actions, thoughts, and intentions contributed greatly to the moral fabric of the Islamic community. He strongly emphasized the idea that a Muslim's true worth is not determined by outward appearances, wealth, or status, but by the sincerity of their faith and actions. This notion aligned with the broader Islamic teaching that all Muslims are equal before God, and it gave rise to a framework for spiritual quality and moral integrity. The role of Hassan al-Basri's sermons. Al-Basri's sermons, filled with profound reflections on life, death, and the transient nature of worldly desires, attracted large audiences in Basra and beyond. He often spoke of the inevitable reality of death and the importance of preparing for the afterlife, urging people to live a life of devotion to God, compassion for others, and unwavering faith in the face of life's trials. His sermons conveyed an intense urgency to live rightly, not in the hope of worldly reward, but for the eternal reward in the afterlife. He was known for a capacity to reach the hearts of his listeners, speaking in a way that connected deeply with their inner selves. Unlike many others who sought fame or worldly recognition, al-Basri's humility and his focus on the unseen and the eternal remained central themes in his preaching. Al-Basri's relationship with other scholars and rulers. While Hassan al-Basri had a reputation for being a social and spiritual reformer, he was also known for his interactions with other scholars and rulers. He did not shy away from challenging the political powers of his time, particularly the Umayyad rulers, who he believed led a life disconnected from the true spirit of Islam. Despite his critiques, he maintained a careful distance from political life, choosing instead to remain a voice of moral and spiritual guidance for the masses. He is reported to have advised rulers and governors, warning them against oppression, excess, and injustice. His commitment to truth, even in the face of adversity, earned him great respect. His counsel was often sought by those in power, but he never compromised his values in exchange for favor or wealth. His stance was that true power comes from being just and upright, not from controlling others or amassing material wealth. Preservation and transmission of his teachings. After his death, the teachings of Hassan al-Basri were preserved by his students and followers. His views were widely respected and eventually integrated into various theological and philosophical schools of thought, including the Ash'ariyya and Mutazilite schools of theology. His ideas about human free will, personal responsibility, and the nature of God played a significant role in shaping debates around predestination, free will, and divine justice. The preservation of his sayings and teachings, many of which were compiled in various works, has ensured that his influence remains alive throughout history. His emphasis on inner spiritual development and the importance of sincerity in worship has been adopted by later scholars, including the Sufis, who viewed him as an early figure of their tradition. Hassan al-Basri's impact on Sufism and Islamic mysticism. Sufism, often considered the mystical dimension of Islam, found much of its foundation in the works and example of early ascetics like Hassan al-Basri. His profound focus on self-purification, his criticism of worldly attachment, and his insistence on a direct relationship with God were later expanded upon by the Sufi orders that emerged in the centuries following his death. Al-Basri's ascetic practices and spiritual discipline provided a model for the Sufi path of seeking closeness to God through love, devotion, and renunciation of worldly desires. His emphasis on the inner life and the need to cultivate virtues such as humility, patience, and sincerity was integral to the development of Sufi ethics. Many Sufi mystics, especially those in the early periods, revered him as a role model and sought to emulate his spiritual practices. The continuing relevance of Hassan al-Basri today. In the modern context, Hassan al-Basri's life and teachings continue to inspire Muslims who seek spiritual depth and guidance. His call for a life centered around sincerity, humility, and accountability to God remains a powerful message in contemporary Islamic thought. Muslims around the world, from scholars to ordinary believers, continue to reflect on his teachings and apply them to their own lives. His insights into the human condition, his understanding of the nature of the soul, and his call for personal transformation and purification are as relevant today as they were in the 7th century. Moreover, Hassan al-Basri's unwavering devotion to God and his consistent focus on spiritual rather than material success offer a counterpoint to the pressures of the modern world, where materialism and the pursuit of wealth often overshadow spiritual fulfillment. His example offers a path toward a balanced and meaningful life, reminding Muslims and non-Muslims alike of the importance of inner peace and moral integrity. Conclusion: a timeless figure of wisdom and devotion, Hassan al-Basri's life serves as a beacon of spiritual clarity and moral conviction. His deep understanding of the Quran, his ability to connect with the inner hearts of his followers, and his commitment to a life of piety, humility, and asceticism make him one of the most revered figures in Islamic history. He demonstrated how one can live a life of true worship and devotion, not through ostentation or material success, but through genuine service to God and others. His contributions to Islamic thought, his spiritual legacy, and his role in the early development of Sufism have ensured that Hassan al-Basri remains a key figure in the intellectual, spiritual, and ethical development of Islam. His influence, rooted in his commitment to truth and sincerity, transcends time, continuing to guide and inspire Muslims across the world.